Every 3 years throughout the country, your local council values your property so it can figure out how to calculate your rates. Once upon a time, it was also a fairly reliable guide to what your home was actually worth. But these days, real estate agents say the figures are so misguided, the valuation isn't worth the paper it's printed on quite often. Properties are being grossly overvalued in a declining market, and sales are falling through as vendors set too much store by what the council says they're worth. Sophia Wenborn with this story.
Welcome to number 224 Snapper Rock Road on Auckland's North Shore. Take a look at the house, a 300 square metre home in good condition and a two-car garage. Confused, real estate agent Mike Pinkney was when he saw this year's council valuation.
They say it's got a land value of $320,000 and the improvements, $460,000 for the improvements on this site here.
The improvements, well, they're clearly non-existent.
Sure, anyone can make a mistake. The trouble is with most of these reports, a lot of people would not know that they're wrong, and people do put a lot of faith in these reports.
We do know that there are some errors out there. We don't inspect all of the properties. We know that, so as expected, there will be some things out there that we do need to correct. Melanie Gallagher has the unenviable task of deciding what your home is worth. She works for QV, the valuation company contracted by 80% of the country's councils to do their 3 yearly rating valuations. Public perception is that it's a completely from office exercise. I even get calls saying that, our valuers are sitting in an office in Melbourne and crazy things like that, but really we do actually inspect a really high proportion of properties, probably average over 50% in a district. QV readily admits it doesn't do individual inspections. It is, after all, a service contracted by council. We would love, as a valuation service provider, to be able to go inside every single property and do a full inspection, but that's just not feasible. Nevertheless, QV does back its service. It's a very useful guide to property buyers or even just owners. They really only reflect the market as at that one point in time, and at that point in time they are a good reflection of market value. Mike Pinkney disagrees. The obvious error of our empty section aside, he believes the ratings valuations are frequently inaccurate. So this is actually your property, isn't it, Mike?
Yes.
And you've just received the valuation on it?
Yes.
It's a large 4-bedroom home on the North Shore, new kitchen and great sea views. So, if you were going to sell a place like this then, what do you think you could get for it?
700s, in the 700,000s.
So what did Quotaville value place it at?
Well, they put $1 million and the land value at 800,000.
But you just don't feel you could sell it for $1 million?
Oh, if someone brings me $1 million, I'll sign the paperwork. Bite their hand off. Yeah, it's not worth $1 million.
Don't take Mike's word for it. He is a real estate agent after all. Have a look at these. This Murray's Bay home was valued on September 1 at $980,000. It sold the very next day for $1.9 million. This house in Campbell's Bay went in the other direction. Valued on September 1 at $1,675,000, it sold 2 weeks earlier for just over $1 million, $665,000 less than the valuation.
There is no way of predicting. We've got them $500,000 above market value and $500,000 below market value. I did look into those for you. Most of them we actually already have flagged. They're known issues to us. They're certainly not a trend or an indication that there's any problem with the valuations out there. We decided to check in other parts of the country as well. Napier homeowners also received their valuations this year, dated 1 September. Again, we looked for sales as close to that valuation date as possible. A property valued at $405,000 on September 1 sold 5 weeks earlier for $270,000. Another one valued at $760,000, 3 weeks later sold for $617,000. In the South Island, Queenstown valuations were done on July 1. One property valued at $480,000 sold 2 weeks earlier for $389,000. And one more valued at $385,000 just 12 days earlier sold for $275,000. Of course, right now, the market is in decline. The prices, we've seen that they're actually lessening. You can see, a % or two within a month. But the variations we've seen are far greater than just 1 or 2%. They're extremely misleading, and there are people out there who actually believe them, and rely on them to some extent.
And so sales are falling through, both buyers and vendors relying too heavily on what the rating valuation tells them.
Been negotiating for about a week, very close to concluding the sale. The vendors received a valuation $160,000 more than the price that was being looked at. They called off the negotiations.
When people are wanting to purchase a home and they're making potentially the biggest financial decision of their life, they're going to want to get the best information possible, and that's probably not a rating valuation.
QV says about 1.5% to 2% of people object to their rating valuations. But Mike Pinkney's wondering why councils bother with them at all.
Why do ratepayers throughout this country have to pay every 3 years for every single property to be revalued? And I use the word valued very loosely there. Why do we have to pay for it?
All right, we would stress that we mentioned Auckland a lot in that story because the revaluations are coming out right at the moment, but obviously this is an issue which affects all New Zealanders wherever you are in the country. Well, with me now is the President of Local Government New Zealand, Lawrence Yule. Lawrence, good evening to you.
Good evening, Paul.
This is a completely unsatisfactory situation, isn't it?
Well, it happens. I mean, I've been in local government for 7 years as a mayor, and every time we've had a valuation, and every time Quotable Value releases the figures, we get these type of issues develop. There is an objection process, so every time people get these valuations in the mail, if they think they're wrong, there is an ability to object, and some people do.
And we know that some people do, but most people just don't have the heartbeats for it, do they? I mean, at the end of the day, and how do people know? At the end of the day, the experts are saying this is what your house is worth. People are thinking, as we've heard in the story, that that's what their house is worth, and yet finding out it probably isn't.
I think there is a perception in the market that the value is something more than it actually is. I mean, councils contract this service to the likes of Quotable Value to give a 3-yearly snapshot of valuations to basically charge rates on the value of those properties. And it's to differentiate one property to another. It is not actually a sort of a marketing tool or something that somebody that's selling or buying a property should rely on overly heavily. They should seek other valuation advice.
It is a marketing tool, though, isn't it? Because we know that buyers do rely on it, so it becomes a marketing tool.
They do rely on it because it comes free to their house. It's paid for by the councils as a way of differentiating
it's paid for by
one property.
Let's not say free. It's paid for by the ratepayers,
yeah,
isn't
correct.
it? So nothing comes free from the council.
No. But what I'm saying is, it's not. If somebody's purchasing a property or buying or selling a property, one of the first things they would normally do is get out their rate demands and look at the value. That would give them an indicative guide.
But through their rates, Lawrence, people have already paid for a valuation, the Quotable Value valuation, and what we know is that that is a legal document, and it's a legal document because you are basing a cost on those people on those figures, aren't you? I mean, you're calculating their rates based on that figure, and we find that a remarkable number of them are wholly incorrect.
Well, I wouldn't say wholly incorrect. You've identified some, and I can't explain why one property in your story was $6,000 out from its valuation, and indeed
$6,000 out.
$600,000 out. And I can't explain that. But what I can do is say every 3 years the properties right throughout New Zealand are revalued, and it is not a perfect system, because to have a perfect system would require a value to value every property individually. So it is done in a computer-based system based on sales data, and then they come up with the figures.
It is not a perfect system, but perhaps it is so imperfect that it is unusable. And remember, you can talk about 3 years because it is done every 3 years, but the figures that we looked at weren't over a 3-year span, they were over a span of a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I understand that, and I can't explain some of those huge anomalies. You'd have to ask Quotable Value.
Well, we did ask Quotable Value, and they said that they only look at about 50% of the properties. It's unsatisfactory.
Well, they only look about 50% of the properties because if they were to look at 100% of the properties, the cost on the ratepayers to provide that service would be a lot greater.
All right, so what we know is there are people in this country who are being rated unfairly.
No, I don't believe so generally.
Well, no, we know that. We know that from our story. Those people in our story were being rated unfairly.
No, not yet, because they have an ability to object to their valuation if they think it's wrong, and they can take it up with Quotable Value or whoever else is the valuer supplier, and they can have that checked, and if it's wrong, it'll be amended.
So you are putting the errors in your system back on the people who are paying you to run that system. You were saying, well, no, hands up, it may be right, it may not be, it's over to you to complain.
No, In a sense, what I'm saying is that we fund, and Quotable Value and others like them provide a valuation service. It produces some anomalies every 3 years. There is an ability to object if people wish to, and we go through that process.
All right, Lawrence, I thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. That's Lawrence Yuill, who's the President of Local Government. Of course,